I wanted to start here at the map today to ask my audience a question. Everybody knows the story of JFK, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Bay of Pigs. It's been a great many years since that happened. Has Cuba moved toward the United States since then, or away from the United States since then? I think universally the answer would be away. They are no more closer to being a capitalist-free republic than they were in the 60s. We've had trade embargoes and sanctions on that country for half a century. Has it done a lick of good? No. In fact, it's made it worse. So my question would be, why do you think continuing sanctions on Venezuela will have any different effect? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. If it hasn't worked in Cuba for 50 years, why would it work in Venezuela? The difference between Cuba and Venezuela, though, is Venezuela is sitting on the largest oil reserves in the known world right now. Or I should say that better. It's sitting on the largest known oil reserves in the world right now. It's not going to work. And there are large forces, large political forces, China, Russia, that have already made massive inroads into that region. And our current policy is doing nothing but pushing them farther and farther and farther into the pockets of that region. How could you expect that those two little countries would be able to stand up under the withering assault of the politics of this region? It's clearly going one direction, and it's not toward the U.S. It's going away from the U.S. So that would be my question. They've just announced, the current administration, about now saying we're not going to even import oil from Venezuela of any kind anymore, trying to basically bankrupt this nation. And I said it in the video before. If someone, some magical large force, prohibited the United States from refinancing its debt, we'd be in the exact same boat they are. It wouldn't matter if we had a leftist government or a conservative government. And that's what exactly happened. The sanctions that were slapped on this country a few years ago prevented them from seeking refinancing with any American banks or any large European banks. The U.S. continually refinances its debt. So this is you're making their argument for them that the U.S. was the problem. And people are going to start to understand that very quickly down there. They always thought that Americans were fat and lazy and overpaid and haughty and high-minded. And, to some extent they were true. Not all Americans are like that, of course, but that's the perception down there. Perceptions like this have been allowed to fester unchecked. And it's causing a massive pushback against U.S. interests. The current administration even threatened to decertify Colombia as a partner in the quote-unquote war on drugs. I don't know how a country who is the largest consumer of these illegal drugs can say that they're a partner. And like I've said, it's like, well, that's why we want the wall. I can hear it now echoing out there. 90% of the illegal drugs that come through that region, through the southern border, come through legal border crossings, either with corruption of the border police or just hidden in cars. So many vehicles come through those crossings. They cannot possibly inspect all of them. So even if tomorrow, like I don't know if anybody out there has watched Colony. It's a show on USA. And it's about this alien invasion where they magically drop down these giant walls, these giant steel walls that are able to cordon off certain areas of the country. If we could magically do that tomorrow, drop this giant wall down there that still allowed the crossings that exist today, the legal ones, you would only stop 10%. 10% of the ones that are coming through the southern border. You wouldn't stop any that were coming through the Caribbean. That's what you would get for your $25 billion investment over 10 years. And that's why I've stayed here on the map, because you look at all of these countries and the problems that they have. And I say problems in quotes. It is a problem, yes, but to them it's a source of income. Massive amounts of U.S. wealth and U.S. currency flows south. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't try or we shouldn't attempt to interdict this. But there's a giant appetite for what they have up here. And there's a giant desire for our currency down there. The U.S. dollar in Venezuela, if you would go down there right now with $100,000, you would live like a king down there. I mean, it's something ridiculous. I think people are like $1.70 a day now, U.S. dollar equivalent. I mean, it's the U.S. dollar down there is, black market. It's, incredibly difficult to find and worth massive amounts of money. And if these people you tell somebody, you know what, you can earn $50 American by doing this or $100 American by doing that, and they've watched their kids go hungry for 3 days, all the political arguments go out the door. You do what you got to do. And that's the myopia that I'm talking about with these sanctions. And I know I've stayed on this tab a long time, but you have to understand what this has really caused down there, the desperation and the reaction in human nature. Why Panama is in such peril. Because right there, literally right there, not very far away, are these giant container ships chocked full of food and clothes and medicines and goods. And every day, these big ships come through from the Pacific side here on the left up through the Caribbean Sea. And these people right over here are going without. And this idea that some will just change your political system and get rid of your government and put in a pro-U.S. this or a pro-U.S. that. It's not like them just pushing a button. And like I've said before, that there's no Second Amendment down here, and believe me, they have all sorts of guns and all sorts of heavy machinery and firepower that they have access to make change. And that's how they do it down there. Sorry about the blur. And also, like I've said before, it's a Venezuelan tugboat company that is providing the tugboats that pull the big gas ships through the new side of the canal. So there are Venezuelans that are working every day on a very critical part of the Panama Canal. It's only a matter of time before those two issues meet up. The violence, the hunger, the desperation, the anti-American sentiment eventually is going to bleed its way over here. And in yesterday's video, I showed you that it's already starting. And Americans are going to start to become a target. I, honest to God, think this thing that happened up here in Cozumel, in Carmen del Playa, was one of the first shots. Because they're not really talking about it much. They're keeping it buried. So this is what I wanted to talk to you about today. If sanctions didn't work in Cuba, and if sanctions made Cuba more communist and more anti-US, why does anyone think it's going to have any different conclusion in Venezuela? There's no good answer for that. So, anyway, I'll leave it there. Sorry I stayed on this tab the whole time, but it's pretty much the idea that I need people thinking about. I need people understanding that there's going to be this giant pushback against American interests in our hemisphere. And it's already starting. And we have history to look at and learn from with Cuba. We can see why that didn't work. They had the backing and the blessing and the help of the Russians. That's not make-believe. That's not fake news. That is the case. The Russians are there. They have been there for a very long time. Why would they not be in Venezuela? They're not even trying to hide the fact that they have made major inroads into Nicaragua, Honduras, Venezuela. You know, we could talk about Trinidad and Tobago and what Admiral Kurt Tidd said yesterday. He warned of this in his Pentagon briefing himself, so it's not just me. So I'll leave it there. Like, share, subscribe. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.